He pushed the door open, the sound of the lock clicking reverberating through the hallway as he stepped into his home. The faint, muffled sounds from the bedroom caught his attention immediately. His heart sank as a cold dread settled over him. He set his bag down quietly and moved toward the source of the noise, his footsteps slow, deliberate. The door to the bedroom was slightly ajar, just enough to see inside. There, on the bed, his wife and his best friend lay entwined, a tangle of betrayal that hit him like a freight train. His chest tightened, the air leaving his lungs as he stood frozen, unable to process the scene unfolding before him. His wife's face turned toward the door, her expression unflinching, her eyes meeting his with a cruel, calculated indifference. She didn't flinch, didn't scramble to cover herself. Instead, her gaze was steady, her actions deliberate, as though she wanted him to see. The audacity, the boldness of her, stunned him into silence. Time seemed to stretch and distort. He couldn't move, couldn't think. The betrayal was suffocating, wrapping around his chest like a vice. This wasn't just any man. It was his friend, someone he trusted, someone he had shared countless moments with. The weight of their combined betrayal crushed him, leaving him numb. Without a word, he turned and left the room, his mind a swirling storm of emotions. Anger, disbelief, humiliation. Every fiber of his being wanted to lash out, to confront them, but he couldn't bring himself to act. Not yet. There was too much to process, too much to unpack. He needed clarity, needed to understand how everything had gone so horribly wrong. The betrayal had cut deep, but the reasons behind it were what haunted him most. This was the beginning of something far more painful and far-reaching than he could have ever imagined. The silence of the house felt oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. He sat alone at the dining table, staring at nothing, his thoughts an unrelenting tide of anger and confusion. The betrayal he had walked in on was raw, seared into his mind, but what gnawed at him more was the question, why? It didn't take long for the answer to reveal itself. In the days that followed, he pieced it together, each revelation hitting him with the weight of another betrayal. She had known. His wife had found out about the affair he thought he had hidden so well. The affair with his boss, the fleeting moments stolen in office corners and hotel rooms under the guise of late meetings. He had been so careful, or so he thought, but the clues he had overlooked, a forgotten receipt, a hurried message, had unraveled his web of lies. She had discovered the truth weeks ago, and instead of confronting him, she had chosen another path. A darker, more calculated form of revenge. She had sought out his closest friend, someone who had been a fixture in their lives for years. The man he had trusted, confided in, and leaned on. And she had seduced him, drawn him into her plan with a deliberate intention to hurt. The realization was devastating. Her actions weren't born of love or passion. They were cold, methodical, designed to strike him where it hurt most. She had wanted him to feel the same betrayal, the same humiliation. And she had succeeded. He replayed their recent interactions in his mind, searching for signs he had missed. Her distant demeanor, the carefully chosen words that cut just a little too deeply, the way she had started spending more time away from home. It had all been there, but he had been too wrapped up in his own deception to notice. She had orchestrated everything, and the precision of her actions left him reeling. As the truth sank in, anger began to replace the numbness. Not just at her, but at himself. He had set this in motion, his choices creating the cracks that had split their marriage apart. But knowing that didn't dull the pain of her retaliation. The calculated cruelty of it was something he hadn't anticipated, and it left a bitter taste in his mouth. The house became a battleground, filled with unspoken tension and unacknowledged truths. Every glance, every movement, every word was loaded with the weight of what they both knew but refused to say. The children, oblivious to the storm brewing around them, were the only reason they maintained the charade of normalcy. But behind closed doors, the facade was crumbling. The betrayal had fractured their lives, but the revelations that followed turned those fractures into a chasm. She had wanted to hurt him, and she had succeeded. But in doing so, she had destroyed whatever was left of their relationship. There was no trust, no love, no foundation to rebuild on. Only the sharp edges of resentment and regret. The decision to file for divorce was inevitable. There was no salvaging what had been broken. The lies, the betrayals, and the calculated revenge had left scars too deep to heal. The day he filed the papers, the weight of the situation felt heavier than he could have imagined. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the dismantling of a life they had built together, the unraveling of every thread that had once connected them. The legal process began swiftly, but it was anything but simple. The initial shock of receiving the divorce papers seemed to break whatever lingering illusions his wife had held. She became combative, refusing to agree to terms, dragging every conversation into a battlefield of accusations. She claimed he was at fault, her anger now a weapon she wielded at every opportunity. Her focus was no longer just on the dissolution of their marriage but on ensuring that she took as much from him as possible. The house was the first point of contention. It had been their sanctuary for years, a place where they had raised their children and shared countless memories. He wanted to sell it, to divide the profits and move on. She, however, refused. She insisted on keeping it, framing it as stability for the children. But he knew better. It wasn't about the kids, it was about control. Keeping the house was her way of maintaining a foothold in his life, a way to remind him of everything they had shared and lost. The lawyers became their intermediaries, exchanging heated emails and lengthy demands. Every asset, every piece of property, every bank account was scrutinized and fought over. She demanded half of everything, from his retirement savings to the car he drove. He pushed back, unwilling to let her dismantle his financial stability out of spite. The battle grew uglier with each passing week, their animosity spilling into every aspect of their lives. The children, caught in the crossfire, began to sense the tension. They asked questions he couldn't answer, their innocent eyes searching his face for reassurance. He did his best to shield them from the worst of it, but there was only so much he could hide. They noticed the way their mother spoke to him, the clipped tone of her voice, the way she avoided looking at him during drop-offs and pickups. They noticed the way he avoided the house, spending more and more time at work or with friends. The facade of normalcy was crumbling, and the cracks were becoming impossible to ignore. During one particularly contentious mediation session, the truth about her revenge came to light. She had no shame in admitting it. In front of the lawyers and the mediator, she laid out her reasons for seducing his friend, her voice calm and unflinching. She framed it as justice, a way to make him feel the pain she had felt when she discovered his affair with his boss. Her words were cutting, laced with bitterness, but they also revealed something deeper, a woman who had been deeply hurt and was lashing out in the only way she knew how. The admission was a turning point. It changed the tone of the proceedings, shifting the focus from blame to resolution. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that this wasn't just about what she had done. It was about what they had both done, the ways they had both failed each other. The marriage had been unraveling long before the betrayals, and they had both played a part in its demise. But understanding didn't make the process any easier. The division of assets dragged on, each side refusing to back down. The house was eventually sold, though not without a bitter fight. The proceeds were split, but the loss of their home felt like a defeat for both of them. The custody arrangement was another battlefield. She wanted equal time with the children, but he argued for primary custody, citing her unstable behavior and the impact it could have on the kids. The court eventually ruled in his favor, granting him primary custody with her receiving visitation rights. The financial settlement was the final hurdle. She fought tooth and nail for every penny, demanding spousal support and a larger share of their joint accounts. He resisted, presenting evidence of her infidelity and the financial strain she had placed on their marriage. The court's decision was a compromise neither of them was satisfied with. She received a modest settlement and temporary spousal support, but it was far less than she had demanded. As the divorce was finalized, the weight of it all began to sink in. The marriage they had once cherished was now reduced to legal documents and court rulings. The life they had built together was gone, replaced by a new reality that neither of them had wanted but both had contributed to. The bitterness lingered, but there was also a sense of finality. The battles had been fought, the wounds inflicted, and now it was time to move on. In the weeks that followed, he began to rebuild. The house was gone, but he found a new place for himself and the kids, a small but cozy home that felt like a fresh start. He threw himself into work, finding solace in the structure and purpose it provided. The children, resilient as ever, adapted quickly, their laughter and energy a reminder of what truly mattered. She, too, began to rebuild. She moved into an apartment across town, starting over in her own way. Their interactions were limited to the children, their conversations brief and polite. The animosity that had defined their divorce began to fade, replaced by a quiet indifference. They were no longer husband and wife, no longer partners or friends. They were simply two people trying to navigate the aftermath of a life that had fallen apart. The divorce had been messy, painful, and exhausting, but it was over. The dust had settled, and what remained was a chance to start anew. For him, it was a chance to reflect on his mistakes, to learn from them, and to build a better future for himself and his children. For her, it was a chance to heal, to find her own path, and to figure out who she was without him. The wounds would take time to heal, but they would heal. And as he looked toward the future, he realized that the end of their marriage wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. The children adjusted in their own ways. The older, perceptive and curious, asked questions that were often hard to answer, while the younger found solace in routines and familiar comforts. He worked tirelessly to shield them from the bitterness, keeping a semblance of normalcy even as tensions with his ex-wife simmered. Their conversations, focused on visitation schedules or school matters, were marked by unspoken resentment and unresolved pain. Her life had shifted from stability to uncertainty. The divorce settlement covered the essentials but was far from the lifestyle she once enjoyed. Struggling to regain her footing, her career faltered further, and her social circle thinned as friends distanced themselves, unwilling to navigate the complexities of divided loyalties. Isolation became an unwelcome companion, forcing her to confront the choices that had led her there. He, on the other hand, channeled his pain into work and fatherhood. Determined to rise above the betrayal, he poured energy into his career, earning respect and accolades. At home, he created a nurturing environment for the children, finding solace in bedtime stories, weekend soccer games, and shared laughter. Each moment became a victory in his effort to rebuild their world. Still, the shadow of betrayal lingered. The memory of his wife with his friend was a wound that dulled with time but never fully healed. Despite his accomplishments, it remained a reminder of the fragility of trust. For her, the consequences of her actions unraveled slowly. Initially, her choices had been fueled by anger and a desire for revenge, but as time passed, she realized the full extent of the damage. The affair, the divorce, and the anger hadn't brought the satisfaction she expected. Instead, they left her grappling with regret and the challenge of rebuilding a life she barely recognized. Co-parenting created moments of unavoidable interaction. Drop-offs and pickups were brief, conversations stripped to logistics. The children felt the tension and asked pointed questions that grew more insightful as they aged. He answered carefully, avoiding blame but acknowledging the truth. She worked to rebuild their trust, though the bond carried the weight of past mistakes. Over time, the bitterness began to subside, replaced by quiet resignation. They would never be friends, but their shared love for the children became a tenuous bridge. School events and holidays were uneasy but manageable, moments where appearances mattered more than personal grievances. A turning point came during a school performance. Their child took the stage, beaming with pride, and for a fleeting moment, the animosity melted. They realized that despite their fractured relationship, they were still partners in parenthood. Years passed, and healing came slowly. For him, life became a steady rhythm of work, parenting, and personal growth. The home he created was warm and full of love. He focused on his children's happiness, knowing they were shaped by the stability he provided. Professionally, he thrived, driven not by anger but by a quiet determination to succeed. Eventually, he found love again, cautiously allowing himself to trust. It was a relationship rooted in respect and shared values, free of the illusions of his past. Her journey was more turbulent but marked by growth. Therapy helped her confront anger and guilt, allowing her to take responsibility and move forward. The modest apartment she once resented became a place of solace. Rediscovering herself, she embraced financial independence and pursued a career path that brought fulfillment. Her relationship with the children improved through patience and consistent effort, rebuilding a bond that, while different, was strong in its own way. Their interactions grew less fraught over time, defined by a cordial distance. School events and milestones brought them together, but their encounters lacked the tension of the past. At their eldest child's high school graduation, they shared a moment of unspoken acknowledgement. Watching their child cross the stage, they felt a mutual sense of pride in what they had achieved as parents, despite everything. In the years that followed, their lives continued to diverge. He built a life filled with purpose and joy, finding peace in the lessons he had learned. She forged her own path, learning to find strength and self-worth within herself. The sharp edges of their past dulled into distant memories, leaving scars that served as reminders of their resilience. At their eldest child's wedding, they stood side by side, watching the newlyweds begin a new chapter. There was no reconciliation, only a quiet understanding of how far they had come. Their story wasn't one of forgiveness or reunion but of survival and growth. They had endured pain, learned from it, and built lives that, while separate, were meaningful and fulfilling. In the end, the betrayal that once defined them became a part of their story.